Consider for a moment, if you will, if you're a physician or a nurse or an IT professional, or if you're somebody who has the opportunity to be the one who delivers meals to patients and families or to patients when they're in the hospital, what an honor it is to be with them on that path as they progress forward. And sometimes on that path, we might be leading them along their way. Other times, we're walking beside them, holding them, perhaps carrying them. And other times, as we learn time and time again, often following them, supporting them from behind, and learning amazing things along the way. During my flight out here from Minnesota, I was looking out the window, and I couldn't help but to reminisce back to having read some of the Lewis and Clark journals, and as we passed over the plains and the mountains, just contemplating the epic journey that they took along that way. And then also kind of being inspired by a lot of the discussion around patient-centered design and human-centered design that we've been discussing this weekend. As I was walking into the conference yesterday through the Stanford campus and passing under some of the giant, amazing fir trees that were there, I started to think back to some of the photographs of Ansel Adams as he photographed the areas around Yellowstone Park and Yosemite and so forth. And I started to wonder and think, what would it be like to have been the guide for some of Ansel Adams' treks through the wilderness, and not ever having taken a chance to pause and because you know the terrain perhaps better than he does, never pause to ask him where exactly it is that he wants to go, or never climb to some sort of point of a precipice with him and not want to reach up and peek through his lens. I mean, it's unthinkable. One of the things that really I thought was beautifully articulated in some of the discussions on Friday was the fact that at some point we're all patients, and at some point we're all caregivers in life. For me, my journey through healthcare began as a child living through lung cancer, and for the last 20 years, I've been able to be walking alongside children and their families as a child life specialist, and that is doing education and counseling and effectively being a liaison from the healthcare team to essentially co-design with children, help understand what the possibilities are, and design their path through their healthcare experiences. For the past 10 years, I've had an opportunity to lead the palliative care services program at AMPLATS, and now currently in the last 6 months I've begun a position helping figure out how we can leverage technology at the point of care to really empower patients and families and improve comfort. This is the University of Minnesota AMPLATS Children's Hospital new tower. This opened up in May of 2011, but our story about this design process begins long before that. This is a photograph that was taken in about 3 weeks ago in September, and since it is Minnesota and because October begins next week, I thought it only fitting to put what the end of October could also bring and look like here. But long before the architects really unleashed their amazing talents at bringing this together, the story really begins when we embarked upon a co-design process. Part of that story was begun when two fathers from families who had lost their daughters through a long process of cancer treatment came forward and said, we really want to see if we can work to develop what would be the most amazing, comforting, empowering room for patients in a hospital. And they began something called the Adopt-A-Room program. And with this program, a donor would donate $200,000. $100,000 would go into the build of one of these rooms. The other $100,000 would go into an endowment to help keep whatever technology and opportunities that came up in the future, help fund that for the room in perpetuity. And what we did in terms of committing to this co-design process about 5 or 6 years ago was to take 3 patient rooms, essentially probably 4 or 5 beds in that, and then convert them down to 2 beds for larger rooms, and then begin the process of building out these rooms as a prototype. And for 2 years, all of the patients and families that came through the hospital were part of that co-design process. And we brought in vendors and technology folks, and we had some design folks in there, but it was really driven by patients and families contributing along the way. And they landed on a lot of really core principles that ended up creating the recipe, essentially, for the secret sauce, if you want to call it that, in designing the new hospital. They looked at things, landing on a concept of having essentially 3 zones in a patient room, where there's a family zone, where all of the elements that are in there are designed around meeting the needs of families, things that allow families to be families despite whatever their circumstances they were experiencing were. That there would be a staff zone where all the medical things could happen kind of in the front of the room. And that core center is going to be really focused on what are the needs of a patient, especially with children, empowering children who, when they come into the hospital, they lose all control. They're told when to eat, when to sleep, when to get up, when to pee, when to poo, all these kinds of things. They don't have a lot of control. But how can we bring back really good, healthy control for these children? So we were able to work through a lot of these different elements so that when it came time to actually build the new children's hospital, after a century literally of being a children's hospital within an adult hospital, we had all this information from patients and families moving forward, and then began a participatory design process along with more co-design during this whole effort. This is a photograph from one of the greeters' desks on our 4th floor of our hospital. And what this captures here, there's 4 colors, and there's a neat story of just to capture a moment of this process. We had the interior designers, when it came time to build the hospital, come forward with a palette of potential colors that would be good in the hospital. And some of these were vibrant, and there was kind of a spectrum of them. And in part of the design process, the staff looked at it and thought, we think it needs to be a little bit more subtle. These are patients and families that are in the hospital for an extended period of time. We brought that forth to our parent advisory board, which actually in October is celebrating its 20th year in service. And they brought it down another level. And then not to stop there, at that time I was working on the pediatric ICU, and in one of the parent programs that I was helping facilitate, we had folks bring in some of the color palettes, and we integrated a discussion about colors into really a therapeutic conversation with the families as they helped us. These were parents who maybe had been up all night and hadn't eaten or slept, or were in various emotional kind of levels or states in their experience. And they brought the colors down yet another level, and then finally bringing it to the patients, current patients that were in the hospital. The children looked at it, and kind of following that trajectory, they brought it down and softened it. And with the colors that they landed on, that's the colors that you see here that were chosen and really guided what the architects were able to do in building the facility. And they integrated those colors through all the different areas of the facility, and then also integrated other elements that were brought up as being important. So this is really focusing on the functional elements, and it's a very thoughtful design with the input of the patients and families and staff. Things like wayfinding and having touch points with people at desks everywhere, that when you enter the hospital, when you enter each of the units, so people can always help you find out where you need to go. And having open spaces where people can kind of relax, and there's natural lighting and places you can kind of stage as you enter the hospital and before you leave, and having interactive elements. So not just little gizmos and things that are kind of fancy or eye-catching when you are entering in a facility, but things that are actually functional. So we have a scrolling marquee, that big circle on there, which is essentially where we can put big donor names and so forth. But when kids come up there, they can take a picture of themselves with one of these interactive panels on the wall, and their picture goes up there. And it's part of helping them feel like, they're part of the hospital. This is my space. But it doesn't stop there. There's other elements families came up with as well, and staff in this design process of being able to send messages to their loved one up in the room, and it'll pop up on their television. So it kind of goes deep. And coming back to the design of the rooms, this is what the rooms ended up looking like across the hospital. So in the parent zone, the family zone, there's a way of privatizing that space. There's a place for up to 2 parents to actually sleep. Under the TV and the cabinets that you can see on there, those are areas where families can actually use things to prepare food and store food, and then a table and chairs where they can eat as a family. A workspace for families, too, that want to continue to work and not have to be separated from their kids. But it all kind of coalesces at one of the most important zones, which is the patient zone, where even their TV becomes a window to the world that they left behind. And then you have other elements that are in the design right there that help give kids control of many things. So this is, for example, is one of our kind of our brains of our operation in the room, where we bring all out of these features together that will empower children. So this girl can push things on the screen and control things like the big massive window blinds, the lights in the room. She can design her own space by impacting the color. There's LED light systems, so she can make it a pink room or a purple room, that kind of a thing. She can even communicate to people how she feels before they come into the room. So I'm sleeping, please leave me alone. And I've already dropped all the shades and cut off the lights and made everybody in my room quiet by not using any words, but by doing my actions. So people coming into the room can understand what the expectations of the patient is. We also invested in interactive patient care technology. In our case, the vendor we used was the Get Well Network. And this gives children, if you think about Get Well Network, it's essentially, think of this as an interactive or graphic wiki or a website, kind of a format here where you click on any of these icons and they lead intuitively to different things that children can use to access education, to communicate with their care team. There's also interactive elements on this where we can set it up to poll pain and they can enter their answer or their questions or anything like that, and it would automatically page, ASCOM phone, email their medical team, which would prompt an immediate response. And even things like service recovery. You know, my little brother's here and he messed with his diaper and now the stink in my trash can is making me want to vomit. Can you come clean it up? That message, just like that, could get typed in, sent right to the environmental services person who's walking around the unit and come in and fix that. If it's not addressed within a number of minutes, then it would escalate to the next person that could help. So having those kind of elements are things that the families really helped us see value to. Access to education here. So if she was a newly diagnosed asthma patient, she can find wealth of information designed for children and families to learn about their illness and be empowered that way, and teach back questions that can be put in there so that if they are able to watch this before talking with their medical team about it, they can have more of a shared mental model when they begin. So technology really is giving us a chance to do amazing things here. Another thing is the separation that families experience. This was one of the needs that they talked a lot about, and over the years, probably the last 6 or 7 years, an initiative that started with emailing digital photographs back and forth to moms who were separated from their babies at birth after a C-section, and the child had to go to the NICU or the PICU, and has morphed into an ongoing design process with patients and families where we now have achieved a vision at our hospital. There's nowhere you could be in our hospital and not have access to video technology where you can reach out to anybody in your home, whether it's across the world or across town. And the kids have, we partnered with an amazing high-touch technology company, communications company in our town that it was able to help us put together a system where kids would have their own private virtual room or their own private chat room, essentially, or video room. And they could put their code into here and share it with anybody else out in the world that they wanted to. And here, so this family just dialed into theirs, and whenever somebody in their circle calls into there, it could be family, it could be provider from back home, it could be school, any of these kinds of things, and be able to participate together. It could be a window into their home. And so here's an example of a dad who's engaging in the bedside rounds. That could be the external provider before discharge. So these kind of platforms, when you really put them in front of families and let them run with them, and then you watch and you take note of what they do, and then you design with them and with technology vendors to accomplish the things that the families and the patients are telling that you need. It's amazing what you can reach. We also have had another example with this is children, as we got this going, really identified that they wanted to be able to not lose touch with school. Now, being an academic health center, we have found patients that are in for up to a year sometimes, and that's a long time to be separated from school. We had a young man that was in our intensive care unit, one of the last patients that I worked with before moving out of a clinical role, and he finished the second half of 3rd grade and completed the first half of 4th grade on our ICU while attached to a Berlin heart machine, which is essentially it's an external LVAD. And one of the things that he missed most was being able to participate with school. And through his whole entire experience of basically attending school every day, myself and his physician were able to do teaching and so forth with his classmates and keep him totally engaged with his home. Here he is doing math class and about ready to give a presentation, but also
what's the really big
here's a
news
moment that you should
you got last week?
I got a heart.
and his physician, who happened to be on vacation in Puerto Rico, stood on a
the
balcony
next really good thing,
to be part of this conversation,
the next
as she
really
has
good
for the
thing
last year.
about that means what for you, Talidre?
I get to go home pretty soon
Oh, God.
to break out of this prison.
Hey.
Oh, the places you will go when you think about this. When you really take the time and you engage with patients and families in the design of what needs to be in place in your healthcare organization, it's just once you start this process, you just don't want to stop. So just quite honestly, there's a certain intimacy with it that leads to an opportunity to experience joy, not just for the patients and families, but for all of us, no matter what your role is. This is kind of a picture of what it is that we're trying to achieve in terms of what we didn't want to do. We did not want to follow the trajectory of the blue line in this graph, where there's some sort of an event, you begin this design process, you reach some point, you think, wow, we did a great thing, and you kind of sit back and enjoy it, right? And then over time, the relevance kind of slips away, your focus on the need slips away until something happens, and it prompts you to begin this design process again. You know, often that might be something lightning strike in the market. It might be your competitor down the road decided to upgrade their facility, and so therefore, gosh, I think we should too. But why not redline it right here? Let's redline it where it's the patients and families in perpetuity helping you co-design and keep that design current. We think we can hit higher levels with that, and we think we can keep that going in time. This is really the point we're at, is the beginning of this red line, and I want to share with you, since this is a design thinking topic, on the left of this model is basically everything I just talked about. It was our initial co-design process, participatory design process. What we're looking at doing right now, and I would just totally welcome any ideas, thought, insights that you guys have that can help out, is we want to, like I said, we don't want to stop this. We want to keep this going. How can we create a flywheel of ongoing co-design where we begin a process, like taking all the design elements that we've been able to put in place with our families and patients and other partners, and make sure that we're truly integrating these capabilities into our workflow. We then want to make sure that we are empowering and teaching our families about the possibilities so they know how to utilize them, and getting into quality improvement and those kind of things, check and make sure is it doing what we think it's doing. But we don't want to stop there. Like I said, once you get this going, it's an amazing process. We want to actually solicit their ideas. Now think about good to great. We want to ask, of all these amazing things that you've been experiencing here, what could we do even better? Or what things, epiphanies do you have about gaps that we haven't even thought about addressing? But not to stop there, let's bring that back somehow to the patients and families, validate our assumptions, and then go into that implementation and piloting stage again, only to start that flywheel happening more and more. Like I say, once you start this, you don't want to stop, because it feels good, and it feels good because it feels right. And it's this ongoing intimacy that we can have with patients and families if we follow this process that can lead to a greater, much greater sense of joy for everybody that's involved in the healthcare process. Thank you.